Hello, and welcome to, I think it's going to be a very quick reaction essentially to the sprint that just happened yesterday, as well as the uh, qualifying session, which didn't happen yesterday because of the weather. So, I'm going to talk through a couple of things in this video, this reaction really, just get some ideas on board, and what do I think the weekend's going to pan out after this. As of recording, in about less than 12 hours time, we're going to have qualifying, and then after that, a couple hours later, it will be the race itself. So hopefully everything goes according to plan, at least for them. And yeah, we'll see how it goes. So I think first of all, we're going to have a look through the sprint. I watched the sprint live last night, and I think it was pretty good. I think if I were to give it a rating, I'd say it's probably like a 7 out of 10. Unfortunately, we've got the broadcasting issue a little bit, I guess. A lot of the times, the focus was on the top four, not necessarily on the action that was happening at the back. We've had a lot of fight with Perez, Liam Lawson. That fight I felt was pretty tasty. Perez obviously climbing all the way from 13th to 8th. But you can see the standings on your screen right now. So Norris, Piastri, Leclerc finished in that order, and it was actually the prediction that I made. When the sprint finished, Verstappen was third, just prior to his VSC infringement, the penalty that he received, the 5-second penalty. And I predicted Norris, Piastri, Leclerc top three. So that prediction, spot on from me. Verstappen P4, obviously, as I said, the 5-second infringement that he did at the VSC, which we'll talk about a little bit on later. Sainz 5, Russell 6th, Gasly 7th, Perez 8th, climbing all the way from 13th to 8th. Shows that the car has a certain level of pace, but I think it's also Perez's strength actually in Brazil. I think Perez usually does quite well in Brazil. And yeah, I think he's showing that still has a little bit of talent in him, I guess, in the sprint. Hopefully, he has a better qualifying, because if he's able to show pace in the race, I think he just needs to put the lap together. Fast lap at the end as well, I remember when I was watching. So, if he's able to channel in a really good qualifying session, I think he's going to stand a pretty good chance of at least fighting a little bit more for the race today on Sunday. And considering when, you need the points for the constructors, this is Perez's chance to really continue to fight for that. Lawson in ninth, I think it's a valiant effort from Liam Lawson. Pretty good drive, just obviously can't keep out Perez at the end. It is what it is. Albon 10th, Hamilton 11th, Colapinto 12th, Ocon 13th from 17th. So not too bad a drive from Esteban again. Behrman, unfortunately, slumping a little bit. He qualified 10th, didn't he? And obviously kept going backwards. And it was at some point when Hulkenberg was ahead of him, and then Behrman overtook him again. And obviously Hulkenberg couldn't finish the race. I think it was an exhaust issue. But still, I think the Haas might lack a little bit of pace this weekend based on what we've seen on the sprint. But ultimately, on the medium tyre, it's very different compared to the softs and the hards on certain cars. So we've only seen what we've seen from the sprint, at least, is just a medium tyre stint. And it shows that there are certain good pace in some of the cars here. And I think some cars, they may not be very good on the mediums, and they have to switch over to the hards. But Tsunoda 15th, obviously, again, I don't think there's much that Tsunoda could have done, really. I think the RB's pace is just thereabouts, but trying to stay position and maybe trying to push forward as much as he could, really. And I think that was probably, the maximum that he could have done. Bottas 16th, Joe 17th. Sauber's are always nowhere to be seen, but Aston Martin, I think they were taking this as a free practice session. I'm just quoting Fernando Alonso here. Absolutely nowhere from the Aston Martin duo, to be honest. They were just absolutely nowhere. So that's how the sprint finished. And so because of that, if you look at the driver standings, Verstappen 367 points because of his 5-second penalty. He loses another point advantage over Lando Norris. The gap's now at 44 points, which is approximately two race wins plus fastest lap is 52 points. So under 2 race wins worth of points now. The gap, again, whether or not it's sizable enough to close it, I think Verstappen needs to have a DNF to make this really interesting. Otherwise, safe to say, I still believe that Norris stands the best chance of just winning this. Sorry, Verstappen stands the best chance of winning the championship. I don't think Norris will be able to fight. He'll be able to fight, but I don't think he'll be able to pick Verstappen. So that's my take on that. Leclerc, I think, cementing third place. It's getting there. Piastri 4th. He's going to have to fight Sainz really for the 4th position instead. It's not going to be easy. Then both Mercs probably going to fight for 6th and 7th on their own, to be honest. Perez in 8th. I think that is pretty much his, really. unless somehow he manages to win a race and then both Mercedes don't score points and he may stand a chance to overtake the Mercedes. Otherwise, 8th is pretty much Perez. Alonso, 9th is pretty much his. Hulkenberg in 10th. Still okay, I'd say, still okay. I think he still stands a chance of doing something. But I think 10th should be his as well, because Lance Stroll is probably not going to score any more points till the end of the season. Sonoda might score a point or two. I think it depends. Hopefully he does. We'll see if he does. But based on what I see with the RB, I think it's going to be a little bit more challenging to score points. But who knows, right? Maybe again, RB might come out with a fluke result that can catapult them up a little bit. Magnussen 13th, he scored quite a couple of points actually these couple of races. Mexico getting a really, really good result as well. Just unfortunate, I guess, to be unwell for this weekend and not participate, but good, really good for Magnussen. Doesn't feel like he's leaving the paddock. It's a shame, I guess, that he's leaving the paddock, but ultimately it is what it is. It's Formula One. The results, to be honest, throughout the entire season, Hulkenberg has smashed Magnussen in general. Glimpse of hope, I think, from Magnussen to take it to Hulkenberg, but not enough for, I think, has to say that, yeah, he deserves a spot again in Formula One. Yeah, I mean, they've got Behrman, they've got Ocon, arguably younger talents to try to continue to channel. I think the Haas is on a pretty decent trajectory. Hopefully they can continue that. Albon, Ricciardo, Gasly. Gasly obviously scored 2 points from the sprint following his 7th place finish. Really good drive from Gasly. First of all, the qualifying was really, really good. Hopefully he's able to continue that performance in the real race. In the actual qualifying later and then the real race. And I think he would stand a really good chance of doing extremely well, hopefully in a race, and maybe score a lot of points for Alpine, and we should have a look at the constructor standings later to see how that might affect. Behrman is just doing Behrman things at the moment, doing okay, getting grips with the car, which is fantastic. So hopefully he's able to continue that, understanding with the car, and I think he's going to have an advantage over Ocon probably, with the car next year as well. And we'll see what happens. I think it's a very interesting season. Next year with Behrman and Ocon together will be intriguing, I think, for sure. Colapinto doing exceptionally well this season. Just since replacing Sargent, he's been fantastic. I don't really know what more we can ask from Colapinto here with the Williams that he's driving. He's extracting as much performance as he can. Of course, there are moments when arguably could have been more performance, but I think in terms of looking at the DNFs wise, I feel that Colapinto has done arguably better than Albon these past couple of races. I think Albon is starting to feel a little bit of pressure, and I think when Sainz comes in next year, I think we'll see a lot of that happening. Sainz might just wipe Albon off the floor, and that's probably where Albon really is. I mean, Albon hasn't really had teammates to fight with him or against him half the time. Latifi, Sargent constantly bins the car into the wall, into barriers. Didn't really have a lot of competition, and I think when pressure's sort of your shoulders, we see an Albon that can really perform. Now that we're starting to see a Colapinto that's rising, it's a bit of a problem, isn't it, for Albon? And then when Sainz comes in next year, we might see an Albon that might struggle again. All I'm just hoping is that I don't see an Albon that there's a duplicate of when Verstappen was his teammate. So hopefully Albon does something to try to at least curb that issue and take the pressure on his shoulders really well, handles the pressure really well, and hopefully is able to deliver pretty well. I think the Williams again under James Vowles, I see potential in the team. It's just how they're going to try to channel that moving forward. Use the partnership with Albon and Sainz. Use Albon's familiarity with the team for so many years, and hopefully Williams are gonna slowly at least be a half decent midfield team. Maybe not at the top immediately. I doubt they're gonna do an Aston Martin where Aston Martin flew up at some point, and obviously now they're gone again. But you get the idea. So hopefully we do see a Williams on the rise, but who knows, right? Ocon in P19 in the driver standings. Ocon, I think at this point is just wanting to leave the team and move on to the Haas team to see what he can do over there. I mean, Gasly has obviously outperformed Ocon this season for sure, 100%. Gasly's been doing really well. I think Gasly has had a lot more exceptional performances, more to grips with the car, and I think it's showing at least. But obviously Gasly's staying in the team. Curious to see how Doohan performs next year as well. So yeah, and Lawson in P20, and of course the bottom three, Joe, Sargent, and Valtteri Bottas. I still believe that where Valtteri Bottas is 23rd in the standings is absolutely not representative of how good Valtteri Bottas has been. He's been able to carry that Sauber up every time in qualifying, right? Tries to get them into Q2. We know how slow the car is, even with the upgrades, and not able to catch up to their nearest rivals. But he's still doing the job, isn't he, Valtteri Bottas? I mean, Joe with the P11 finish in Bahrain, that's why Joe is ahead of Bottas in the standings. But I just really hope that Bottas somehow manages to get that Sauber at least a point. I don't even know if he's going to be in the paddock next year. As it stands, I think that may not happen. I think he's getting a little bit slimmer, and in fact, I think there is a clause where he could actually go back to Mercedes. Whether or not he's going to take that option, I'm not too sure. But yeah, that's how the driver standings look. And now let's head over to the constructors. So with the constructors, McLaren on top, Ferrari second, Red Bull third. As we've seen, the gap is ever increasing between McLaren and Ferrari, and then Ferrari and Red Bull. And then the rest is just pretty much their ding-dong battling about. But I think what we need to look at is 6th and 7th and 8th and 9th. Has 10 points ahead of Racing Bulls. If things stay as they are, Racing Bulls don't score points, Haas also don't score points. 6th place is pretty much Haas's, but I think they have to be a little bit worried because maybe the Racing Bulls has said a fluke result can come along, and that could obviously jeopardize Haas's 6th place. So they need to continue to be consistent and put in these sort of performances. But I think what's more intriguing for me, at least, is the 8th and 9th position that we're looking at here. Williams 17 points, Alpine 16 points, with the 2 points that Gasly has scored from 14 to 16 points. They're just a point behind Williams now. And Williams had a good run of points, I think, when Colapinto first joined Austin. Had some good points. I think Singapore, if I'm not wrong, Colapinto scored points. So what needs to happen now, Williams, is they need to buck up a little bit more. Albon just needs to have, I think, better luck at least. I mean, Mexico wasn't his fault when Tsunoda just crashed into him. Nothing that Albon could do, but Colapinto didn't score points either. So now they need things to go their way massively, or at least hope that things don't go Alpine's way. Because, I mean, it's always the prize money ultimately that we're looking at here. So hopefully, Williams side at least, they want to, be able to cement that 8th place. But as of now, I think that's really probably going to go down to the wire, especially if Gasly has a really good qualifying again this upcoming qualifying and scores a couple of points in the race. I think it might swing Alpine's way instead. So that's going to be very interesting. But I think the most important thing in the sprint that happened was about Norris and Piastri. Obviously, it ended up Norris finishing first and Piastri finishing second. But Piastri obviously started on pole. And throughout the race, there was this conversation between Norris and his engineer, Piastri and his engineer, talking about to give Norris the position. Now, I think it felt really, really messy. And it was shouting Hungary at me when I was watching it, because I felt that the place, as in the position, should have been given a lot earlier. McLaren both had a really healthy lead at the start, and I felt that they should have used that to their advantage and allowed the sort of positions early on, allow Norris to pull through. To me, at least, Norris clearly has a much better raw pace than Piastri, 100%. I think Norris should be ahead of Piastri, pull Piastri along, get the two of them, secure that 1-2. But instead, what happened was Piastri continued to stay ahead of Norris. Norris can't really close that gap, can't really attack Piastri. And then because of that sort of bunched up the 4 cars with Leclerc and Verstappen behind. Leclerc and Verstappen were fighting at the start, which is why McLaren had that healthy lead. But once Leclerc and Verstappen sort of tried to tow each other along, that resulted in the 4 being bunched up quite massively. And because of that nearly obviously jeopardized the 1-2 finish for McLaren. They need to talk about this more. I believe, and I said this yesterday in the stream, that Piastri should play as a team player for this season at least, when he knows that he's mathematically not going to win the championship. Okay, maybe mathematically he could still win, but realistically, to get to win the Drivers' Championship is not going to be possible, right? Now what you have to do is try to get the Constructors for sure. He needs to help McLaren to win the Constructors and help Lando Norris to win the Drivers, at least to the best of his ability. Play a bit of a Perez when Verstappen won his first championship. Then when next year comes along, since we know Piastri has, and he himself should know that he has a good amount of pace, use that to his advantage, right? When he comes into next season, let's say he has a huge advantage over Lando Norris. Say that I've helped you last year, Norris, now it's your turn to help me. And I think it works. I think it's going to work in his favor. But if, let's say now he's already giving this little bit of beef within the team, what if Piastri is in a driver's fight next year, for example, next season? Do we really see Norris helping him? I think this is something that Piastri needs to think about. Sometimes it's really not about the ego, because Formula One isn't a one-man team. You've got two drivers for a reason. For the constructors, but even for drivers, they're going to help you, right? I'm not going to deny that when Verstappen won his first championship, Perez definitely, indefinitely helped him try to hold Hamilton back up as much as possible, etc., etc., etc. But of course, Perez isn't like Verstappen. Perez hasn't been able to take the fight up to Verstappen. Perez has not been able to show performances to show that he is a driver's champion worthy in that Red Bull over the past 3 years. So we don't really see that happening. We didn't see a Perez that could take it and ask Verstappen for help. I think if that happened, Verstappen wouldn't help him either, because it's Verstappen, isn't it? But if we look at Piastri and Norris, I think they could work pretty well. And I think if Piastri were to fight for our drivers, I can see Norris helping him. But Piastri has to help Norris now for Norris to return the favor to Piastri, if that makes sense. So I just don't get it, McLaren. They need to really sort this out here. The way that they're dealing with this is like dealing with primary school children. It's ridiculous in my opinion, and they need to keep... There's no point talking about something. Talking about something, planning about something is one thing. Need to execute that in the race itself. We can't just have like Norris be like, oh, whatever, and Piastri be like, oh, I'll do this, I'll do that. It's not going to work. They have to be very crisp with their actions. They have to be sharp in what they're doing. Get things right. Set the tone right in the team. Get everything that's needed to. Team orders, just come in. It doesn't matter. You can't let two of your drivers continue to be like this. This is going to cause a lot of problems within the team, which is something that, from a neutral fan's perspective, I don't want that to happen to McLaren. I don't want the two of them to fall out of favour with each other, cause havoc in the team. That's not going to help McLaren in general. So this is something that McLaren really need to continually sort this out before another problem comes in again. And who knows, right? Maybe later during the race, we might see something like that again. And of course, the other point that we would like to talk about is the Verstappen VSC infringement with the 5-second penalty that was given after the race. When I was watching it, and I felt Verstappen was really close, as in, first of all, the VSC. I felt it was necessary. The car was parked in a really awkward position. I can understand that. What I didn't understand was, why did the VSC stop? Like, why did it end the VSC? I felt they could just end it behind the VSC, because it was so last minute. Like, suddenly it was just saying VSC ending, and it was like lap 24 out of 24, and Verstappen obviously pulled up really close to Piastri and stood a chance of overtaking. And obviously I think there's a delta that the drivers have to meet during the VSC, because otherwise it constitutes as gaining an advantage over the driver in front of you. So because of that, or even behind you, whatever direction you're going to look at. And because of that, obviously, then that would mean that Verstappen had to obviously have his delta be at a certain time, and he obviously didn't. And because of that, he had an infringement, which I think makes sense. But was that necessary? I think no, because ultimately he finished the position behind Charles Leclerc. Thankfully, this is in the race. And I think in the race, would he have made that risk again? Would he have taken that decision? Probably not. I mean, I can see Verstappen's frustration being stuck behind Leclerc the entirety of the race. I didn't expect Verstappen to have the upper hand pace over Charles Leclerc. I thought Leclerc was going to keep it there, but unfortunately he didn't. But I think when I look at it that way, it's fine from Verstappen's point of view. I think just keep that points deficit to the minimum. Like, the deficit that he's losing to Norris in the sprint at least is 1-2 points. He has still, I think, in my opinion, a pretty healthy lead, barring any DNS or barring any crazy action happening. So I think Verstappen shouldn't have done that. He shouldn't have tried to overtake Piastri at that point in time. But then again, it has happened, and he's got their 5 seconds. It's obviously better than the 20-second that he had in Mexico. So I think Verstappen needs to be a lot more careful. He's picking up a couple of penalties right now, and obviously the points, like the number of points that drivers actually accumulate once he reaches a certain amount, I think like 12 points or something, they'll be banned for a race. I think Verstappen is at 7 points now. So he needs to be a little bit more careful here towards the end of the season to prevent a race ban at the minimum. And yeah, I think Verstappen just needs to keep his head down. If he wants to win the championship, he's gonna have to keep his head down. He's had worse. I mean, Hamilton gave him a much bigger fight than Norris right now. So I don't see why Verstappen is like panicking. It looks like he's panicking a lot, but maybe he isn't. But I think certain decisions that he has made in this race, in the sprint of VSC and the Mexico Grand Prix, that 20-second penalty, I felt both of these are quite the unnecessary ones. But yeah, we'll see what happens with Verstappen in the qualifying later on and in the race, and hopefully he would be able to get a good result on his end, and hopefully, I think Red Bull would be pretty pleased if to see Verstappen performing again. I think the car has an amount of pace in it. It's just, I think it's obviously hard to beat the McLarens. I think what Verstappen can just do now is just minimize the gap really between him and Norris, right? To just ensure that the deficit that he's losing at each time is not extreme. I think that's the best that Verstappen can do. And so with the cancellation of qualifying, I think there's only one point I really want to talk about, which is what is the point of a wet weather tire? Now, from my understanding, the point of a wet weather tire is for wet weather conditions, right? And throughout the course of me watching Formula 1 for the past 3 to 4 years, every time the intermediate tire is used, it's always used when the rain is still on the tarmac of the track, and it's wet, it's damp, but it's not dry. So that's why you switch over to the intermediate tire. The wet tires rarely come on, to be honest. And this reminded me, I don't know if I mentioned this earlier, but this reminded me when Spa came along in 2021, question mark, when it was like a 3-hour race that didn't happen. And it was half points. Russell was on the podium with the Williams, I remember, I think P2. So when I reminded myself of that moment, I look at it now and I was thinking, they didn't bother to try, if I'm not wrong. Like, they didn't bother to get the cars out to try to race or even at least get a lap in or two. Then what's the point of a wet weather tire? I think Pirelli needs to consider this. Now, of course, Formula 1 has risk. Rain makes the track very slippery, right? And drivers taking risk on their own accord, I think that's really important as well. Yes, positions are important. Yes, winning things are important, but your safety, your own health, and the risk that you take on track is even more crucial, even more vital. To me, at least, I think the show should still go on to a certain extent. Get the wet weather tires on, get the wets on. And I think maybe Pirelli might want to do something to the wet weather tire. Have that a little bit more grip. Let them be a lot slower, but at least there is still racing action going on. Otherwise, what we're gonna have moving forward is every time there's a wet weather condition, the FIA probably gonna be like, it's Inters or we're not gonna race. It's Inters or we're not gonna do qualifying. It's Inters or we're gonna cancel the session. This is not it from a racing perspective. You cannot control the weather unless it's a flood, right? I mean, it's a flood, obviously you can't race. But these are not unraceable conditions, and we're just looking at qualifying. Even we're not even looking at racing. Qualifying, you just try to get the maximum out of one lap. I think this would have thrown the spanner in the works in that sense, where teams where you wouldn't expect them to perform well in these sort of conditions and put their car up in an unorthodox position, which puts them in a very good position for the race itself. I felt like this was an opportunity for a curveball to even happen. Yes, of course, torrential rain can happen, right? But I feel that by making the decision to cancel, that is not the way things should go, from at least for me, at least. When you can use the wet weather tire to your advantage, use it, right? That's the purpose of a wet weather tire. And I felt that if moving forward we have this sort of problems again, it's not really going to do Formula 1 good anymore. Then what's the point of a wet weather tire, as I've said earlier? So I think this is something you need to think about. Of course, as I 100% agree, safety is super important, right? If the water levels are really, really high, don't do it. Completely makes sense. Wait for it to sort of dry out a little bit more. But that doesn't mean that in raining conditions, you just stop everything like that. I felt when Spa was the race, the making the cancellation was the right thing, because they cannot see what's in front of them. But it's qualifying. I think it'd still be okay. I mean, qualifying did happen the day before still. So this is something that I think the FIA needs to look at it. I think better handling needs to happen. But maybe what I'm saying here is just a very maybe skewed perspective. But what exactly happened, with regards to the rain, etc., etc. I tried to search on it. There really isn't much info. It just talks about torrential rain, and I didn't watch qualifying live either. But for me, at least, I'm a bit concerned because this isn't the first time this has happened now. And if there's more rain coming up at any point in time, what's going to happen to races in the future? I think this is something that is a point of contention. But yeah, I feel that the wet weather tire needs to play up its own part in the sport. If not, we just need to have dry tires and just ensure that, or try to ensure we only can race in dry conditions. Then there's no wet weather racing, and people love to watch wet weather racing. Drivers agree that wet weather racing gives a little bit more of a curveball in it. So there must be an element of fun, a little bit of risk here and there, but also try to play safe. So this is just like, as I said, this last point here is just something that I think is up for discussion ultimately. And yeah, hopefully there would be a better solution moving forward from the FIA. And as I said, discuss with Pirelli how to make these tires work a lot better and see how they can curb this weather issue. Right, that shall be it for this particular video. I think it's quite a long one actually, but I will try to make a post-race video, but that will only come sometime next week. It will not come immediately after the race. Give me a couple of days for that. And yeah, and then hopefully after that it will be Las Vegas, so that will be a very interesting one. I think it's going to be a week break after 1 or 2 weeks break actually, from Brazil all the way to Las Vegas. So hopefully we will be entertained in the qualifying and in the race tonight. But that'll be it for me. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, goodbye. Oh, and of course, please remember to like, share, subscribe. Bye bye.